When your own blood looks you in the eye and tells you to step aside, it cuts deeper than any knife. When he adds a smirk to that statement, as if you've already been buried, the pain becomes something else entirely. And when it's your own son, well, there are no words strong enough to cover that kind of betrayal. My name is Walter Grant. I'm 72 years old, widower of nearly a decade, and for more than 40 years I ran a company that bore my name and my sweat. Grant and Company wasn't just a business. It was the backbone of my life, the thing that paid for our home, our food, my son's education. I started it from nothing. A rented garage, a second-hand desk, and a stubborn refusal to quit when the first 3 years nearly broke me. I was never a man of luxury. I wore the same worn boots on job sites for years. I packed my lunches when I could have afforded a restaurant meal. I missed vacations, family trips, birthdays sometimes, all because I was chasing contracts, keeping the business afloat, making sure there would always be something solid to pass down when I was too old to carry it on my back. For decades, I believed that my sacrifice would mean my son, Michael, could one day step in with pride and gratitude. I pictured us working side by side, him learning from me, then carrying the torch when I could no longer run with it. That was the dream. That was the plan. But dreams, I've learned, rarely survive the people you dream them for. It started small, the way most betrayals do. Michael, now in his mid-40s, began showing impatience with how I handled things. He called my methods outdated, my decision-making too slow, and he'd often sigh loudly when I reminded him of the principles that built the company: honesty, reliability, relationships. "Dad, no one cares about handshakes anymore," he'd say, rolling his eyes. "This is the digital age. It's about speed, leverage, and risk." I thought he was just ambitious, maybe even restless. A part of me was proud. Ambition was good, wasn't it? I had fought tooth and nail with ambition in my own younger years, but his tone had changed. It wasn't eagerness, it was dismissal. He wasn't looking at me as a mentor anymore. He was looking at me as an obstacle. One evening, he came into my study, where I still kept all the old ledgers and framed contracts from the early days. He didn't knock. He just leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You should think about retiring, Dad," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge under it. "You've done your part. It's time to let the next generation take over." I set down my pen and looked at him. "Michael, I've told you before, you'll have your time, but the business still needs me. There's more to running a company than numbers and quick deals. Relationships take years to build. Trust takes decades." He smirked then, the kind of smirk that chilled me because I recognized it. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't his mother's either. It was something new, arrogance wrapped in entitlement. "Dad," he said, leaning forward slightly, "stay out of family matters. This is my company now. People don't want an old man shaking their hand anymore. They want someone who knows the game. Let me handle it." I didn't answer right away. My chest tightened, and for the first time I felt a cold distance between us that frightened me more than age or illness ever had. This wasn't a son asking his father for guidance. This was a man pushing another man off the cliff to claim the land beneath. I swallowed hard. "Family matters?" I repeated slowly. "Michael, this company is more than a family matter. It's my life's work. You wouldn't have a degree, a car, or the roof over your head without what we built here." He shrugged. "Exactly. And I'm going to make sure it grows into something bigger. But you've done enough. Done enough." Like 40 years of sweat and sacrifice was a shift that had finally ended, like I could clock out and just disappear. That night, after he walked away, I sat in that study long after the lights were off. My hand rested on the old leather chair I'd bought when I signed our first major contract. I thought of my wife, gone 10 years now, and wondered what she'd say if she saw Michael looking at me like a relic. The truth I began to taste, bitter and undeniable, was that my son no longer saw me as his father. He saw me as a stepping stone, something to be brushed aside on his way to whatever empire he thought he was building. And while I didn't know it yet, that conversation was only the beginning. The storm hadn't even broken, but I would weather it, and I would not go quietly. The next few weeks after that conversation were strained, to put it lightly. Every time I walked into the office, I felt the air change. Employees who once stood when I entered the room now glanced toward Michael before offering a greeting. Old partners, who used to call me directly for reassurance, started leaving voicemails for my son instead. It was as though, in a single conversation, Michael had shifted the axis of the business, and I was sliding toward the edge. I spent a lot of time looking back in those days. I'd sit at my desk with my coffee, staring out the window at the yard where trucks came and went, and think about the beginning. I remembered how broke we were when I married my wife, Helen. She used to patch my shirts so I could look decent when meeting clients. I remembered driving hours just to pitch contracts no one thought a small-town man like me could handle. I remembered the night I came home with my first big deal, a warehouse construction contract. And Helen cried when I handed her a check, telling her she could finally buy new shoes. Every brick, every tool, every loyal worker, they were more than numbers on a balance sheet. They were chapters of my life. Michael knew those stories. He'd grown up with them. As a boy, he'd sit on the edge of my desk, swinging his legs, asking when he'd be old enough to wear a hard hat like mine. Somewhere along the way, that boy vanished. The man who replaced him was sharper, colder, convinced he deserved everything without paying the same dues. I tried to ignore the little things at first. He started canceling contracts I had nurtured for years, claiming the margins were too thin. He hired flashy consultants who promised aggressive growth, men in suits who spoke in jargon but didn't know the first thing about our line of work. He even changed the company's letterhead without telling me. Something as small as a logo, but to me, it was like repainting the family home without asking. One Friday afternoon, the break came. We were in a boardroom meeting with half a dozen senior staff. Most of them had been with me for decades, men and women I trusted like family. We were discussing a client who'd run into some financial trouble, but had always been loyal. I suggested we give him an extension on payments. Michael leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen, and then spoke over me. "Dad, this isn't charity work. We're not running a retirement home for failing clients. If they can't pay, we cut them loose." End of story. The room went silent. I looked at him, stunned. "Michael, you don't throw away relationships like that. This client has been with us for 20 years. When no one else would take a chance on us, he did. That kind of loyalty deserves grace." Michael smirked, that same cruel curl of his mouth that had started to appear more often. "Grace doesn't pay the bills. Efficiency does. This is exactly why the company needs new leadership. We can't keep operating with your outdated sentimentality." A couple of staff members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Rick, cleared his throat as if to support me, but Michael cut him off. "No, Rick. Times have changed. Either we move forward or we get left behind." And then, in front of everyone, he turned to me and said, "Dad, maybe it's time you step back from these meetings. We can handle them without you." The words hit harder than any fist. My own son, telling me to step aside in a room full of people who had built this business with me. I swallowed, keeping my voice steady. "Michael, watch yourself. This company wasn't built on cutting corners or discarding people. It was built on trust, and if you lose that, No flashy consultant will save you." He leaned in, his tone almost mocking. "Trust doesn't matter if you own everything." The meeting dissolved shortly after, but the damage was done. I could see the confusion in the faces of my loyal employees, torn between their respect for me and their fear of siding against Michael, the man who seemed to be grabbing the reins tighter every day. That night, I sat in the office, long after everyone left. I touched the framed photo of Helen that still sat on my desk. "He's slipping, Helen," I whispered. "He's forgetting what matters." But somewhere deep inside, a seed of suspicion began to sprout. Michael wasn't just being careless or brash. No, he was moving with intention, one decision at a time, cutting away my influence, reshaping the company into something I hardly recognized. And, as much as it pained me to admit it, this wasn't just a generational clash. It was a hostile takeover. By the time spring came, the air around Grant and Company felt like foreign soil. The hum of the office had changed, less like the steady rhythm of a well-oiled machine, more like the jittery clatter of gears grinding against one another. It wasn't just in my head. I could see it, hear it, even smell it. Gone were the faint aromas of coffee brewing late into the evening, the small talk in hallways, the laughter of workers who'd known each other for decades. What lingered now was tension. People whispered. Some avoided eye contact. Others, faces I'd trusted for years, suddenly seemed distant. It was Rick, one of my oldest managers, who finally sat down across from me one evening when most of the office had cleared out. He was nervous, his hands restless on the desk. "Walter," he said, lowering his voice, "you should know. Things are shifting faster than you think." I frowned. "Shifting how?" He hesitated before saying it. "Michael's been making moves. He's fired people without your sign-off. Good people. Folks who've been with you 20 years. He's bringing in his own circle. His wife's brother, some friend from college who knows nothing about our contracts. And the worst of it? Vendors and clients are being told not to come to you directly anymore. All communications are going through him." I sat back, my chest heavy. Fired? Locked out of clients? My jaw tightened. Without my approval? Rick gave me a look that told me everything. Without even a conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, listening to the silence of the house I once shared with Helen. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the wood grain. All those years of sacrifice, of building brick by brick, relationship by relationship, and my own son was dismantling it in the dark. The next morning I went to the office early. I pulled financial records. Passwords had been changed. Reports were locked. I had to ask my secretary, who looked uneasy, just to get access to payroll. And there it was, names missing, familiar ones, men and women who had helped me lift beams with their own backs in the early years. Quietly dismissed. I confronted Michael that afternoon in his office. He was leaning back in the chair I had bought when he graduated from college, a chair I had once dreamed he would earn through dedication. Now he sat in it like a king. "Michael," I said, shutting the door behind me, "what is this? You're firing people without my knowledge, changing passwords, locking me out of my own company?" He didn't flinch. In fact, he smiled faintly, as if he'd been waiting for this. "Dad, it's called leadership. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions. You always told me to think of the future. Well, the future doesn't have room for dead weight." "Dead weight?" My voice cracked, anger rising. "These are people who gave their lives to this company, people who carried us when times were lean. You can't treat them like numbers on a page." He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't the same world you started in. Loyalty doesn't pay dividends. Efficiency does. You're clinging to fossils, Dad." and it's holding us back." I stared at him, stunned at the coldness in his eyes. "And locking me out? Is that efficiency, too?" His smirk deepened. "Dad, you've had your time. It's over. This is my company now. People look at you and see the past. They look at me and see the future. Stay out of family matters and enjoy your retirement. You've earned it." Those words, "stay out of family matters," echoed like a hammer blow. Family matters? This was more than family. This was my life, my legacy, and my own son was cutting me out with a grin. I left his office shaking. I walked down the hallway, past the framed photographs of projects we'd completed, schools, hospitals, community centers, and, for the first time, I felt like a ghost in my own house. That evening, I sat in my study at home, staring at Helen's picture. "Did we do this, Helen?" I whispered. "Did we raise a man who thinks betrayal is ambition?" But as my grief twisted in my chest, something else rose with it. Memory. A detail Michael had overlooked, blinded by arrogance. Years ago, on my lawyer's advice, I had never transferred full ownership of the company. Despite Michael's bravado, despite his chest-thumping speeches about control, the truth was simple. The papers still listed me as the majority shareholder. The legal reins had never left my hands. That realization settled over me like a calm cloak. Michael thought he had won. He thought he had buried me in my own creation. But in his arrogance, he had forgotten the foundation I had quietly set in place decades ago. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a slow smile. The storm had broken. And now, I knew exactly how I would weather it. I didn't tell Michael what I'd remembered that night. I didn't call him into my study and confront him with the truth. No, that would have been the reaction of a younger man, hot-headed, proud, desperate to prove a point. At 72, I knew better. Sometimes silence is sharper than any shout. The next morning, instead of marching into his office, I drove somewhere I hadn't been in years, the law firm of my old friend Harold Whitaker. Harold had drafted every contract and every amendment that carried this company forward. He knew the bones of it better than anyone, and he was the one who had once advised me never to hand over the majority of shares, no matter how much I trusted my son. He was older now, too, gray, stooped, his office cluttered with files and yellowing books. But when he saw me, his eyes still had that sharp glint. "Walter," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "I had a feeling you'd be back here one day. Sit down." I told him everything, how Michael had been firing people, locking me out of accounts, treating me like a fossil. I repeated his words, "Stay out of family matters," and I could see Harold's jaw tighten. Finally, I leaned forward and asked, "Harold, tell me straight, who owns this company?" He opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and flipped it open. Page after page of signatures, dates, seals. He tapped the last sheet with a bony finger. "You do, Walter. You always have, 71%. Michael has less than 30. He can bark all he wants, but the papers don't lie. On paper, you're still the man I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, exactly, but steadiness. Like a captain gripping the wheel in a storm, realizing the ship is still his to steer. "What are my options?" I asked. Harold smiled faintly. "You've got more than he does, I'll tell you that. You can fire him tomorrow if you wish. You could strip him of authority, sell the business, restructure, whatever you decide. He's been playing king with borrowed crowns." I sat back, breathing deeply. My mind was already moving faster than it had in years. No rash moves, I told myself. Michael was arrogant, but arrogance made him sloppy. If I played my hand too soon, he'd fight, maybe drag the company into chaos. But if I was patient, I could not only reclaim what was mine, I could make sure he learned what it meant to betray trust so deeply. "Not yet," I murmured. "I want him to feel secure. Let him think he's untouchable." Harold studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then plan carefully. You've got the upper hand, but don't underestimate how far greed can drive a man like Michael." That evening I returned to the office as if nothing had happened. Michael was holding court in the conference room with a couple of his shiny new hires, young men in expensive suits who looked at me as if I were some janitor who had wandered in by mistake. Michael saw me in the doorway and didn't even pause his speech. "And once we secure the expansion deal, we'll outgrow half the local competition," he said, leaning casually against the table. "This is the new era of Grant and Company." I stood there silently, meeting his eyes just long enough for him to know I'd heard. Then I turned and walked away. Inside, though, I was already drawing up plans. The days that followed, I played my part well. I kept attending the office, but I stopped arguing with Michael. When he dismissed employees, I stayed quiet. When he spent lavishly on growth strategies, I didn't challenge him. Outwardly, I was the old man slowly fading, beaten down by time and irrelevance. Inwardly, I was watching, taking notes, collecting evidence. Meanwhile, Harold and I met twice a week. We mapped every option, every loophole, every potential move. I made sure the company's shares were secured in my name, with no room for Michael to contest. I reviewed sale clauses I hadn't looked at in years. I even opened a new account at a separate bank, somewhere Michael didn't even know I had ties. And each night when I sat alone at home, I imagined Helen's voice in my ear. "Don't let him take everything you built, Walter. Don't let him strip away your dignity." It wasn't about the money anymore. It wasn't even about the company itself. It was about something deeper, about teaching a man who thought legacy was a trophy that could be stolen, that legacy is a weight, and only the worthy can carry it. The breaking point came 2 weeks later at a family dinner. Michael stood up, glass in hand, boasting about his plans to expand overseas. "We're entering a new era," he said, his wife beaming beside him. "And soon the old ways will be nothing more than a story we tell." Everyone laughed politely. I sat there, silent, hands folded. Because while Michael raised his glass to toast the future, I knew something he didn't. The future was already out of his hands. The more I kept quiet, the bolder Michael became. Arrogance thrives in silence, and he mistook my calm for surrender. Over the next month, his recklessness spread like fire. Company funds, once carefully monitored, were now being siphoned into personal luxuries. A brand-new luxury SUV for himself, a vacation home rental in Aspen for a weekend business retreat, dinner bills that could have fed 3 of our job sites for a week. Every time I opened the books, my jaw clenched tighter. But I didn't confront him immediately. No, patience. Let him dig deeper. Let him believe the throne was his. It was the employees who suffered most. Men and women who'd stood beside me through recessions and lean years were suddenly working under consultants half their age with no understanding of the trade. They came to me quietly, in the hallways, in the parking lot, asking if I'd lost control. And I told them only one thing: trust me. Still, the breaking point loomed. One morning I walked into the office and found Michael in the lobby, laughing with 2 of his new hires. When he saw me, his laughter didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. "Dad," he said loudly, so everyone could hear, "I was just telling the guys here how we'll be phasing out the old guard soon. Streamlining operations. No more sentimental deadweight. A few heads turned." My chest tightened. I stepped closer, lowering my voice, though the steel in it was unmistakable. "Michael, watch your tongue. These people built the company you're parading around in." He leaned closer, smirk plastered across his face. And what about you? What did you build lately? You sit in your office staring at old photos while I make deals. You've become decoration. Something in me flared then. I met his eyes, steady and unshaken. Don't mistake patience for weakness, son. Weakness is what comes from arrogance and waste, and I see both dripping off you like sweat. The laughter from his friends faltered. Michael's smirk faltered too, just slightly, before he covered it with a chuckle. Enjoy your speeches, Dad. Soon you won't even have a seat in the building. It was a warning, but also an admission. He was planning to push me out entirely. Later that week, Michael strutted into my office with a folder. He dropped it onto my desk like a gauntlet. "Expansion deal," he said. "Multi-million-dollar contract. All I need is your signature." I opened it. My eyes scanned the terms, and my stomach dropped. It was reckless, a high-risk gamble that would tie up assets we didn't have and jeopardize our stability. I looked up sharply. "This deal could sink us," Michael shrugged. "Or it could triple our value overnight." But I forgot. You don't believe in risk. You just believe in crawling. I pushed the folder back across the desk. "Not with my signature." His eyes narrowed. For the first time, the smirk was gone. "You'll regret that," he muttered before storming out. That night I sat with Harold again, reviewing everything. My lawyer leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen. "He's unraveling, Walter. That kind of recklessness doesn't just hurt the company. It exposes him legally. If you wanted to act, now's the time." But I shook my head. "Not yet. He needs to believe he's untouchable. Let him go on his little vacation. Then we'll move," because Michael had been bragging non-stop about his upcoming trip to Mexico. "A week on the beach," he said, cocktails in hand while his empire ran itself. He paraded the trip around the office like a trophy, telling employees he deserved it after dragging the company into the modern world. I listened. I nodded. I even wished him a safe trip. Inside, though, my resolve was steel. The day he left, he strutted out of the office with his wife, luggage in hand, tossing the keys to his new SUV like he'd just conquered Rome. He didn't even look back at me. Why would he? In his mind, the old man was already buried under the sand he was about to sunbathe on. But arrogance blinds the eyes and dulls the ears, and while he toasted himself on a beach in Mexico, I would be sitting in my lawyer's office with the papers that still bore my name. The time for silence was almost over. The morning Michael boarded his flight to Mexico, the office was buzzing with forced cheer. He strutted through the lobby, his wife wheeling designer luggage behind him, while employees offered half-hearted goodbyes. I stood at the balcony above, watching. He didn't look up, didn't glance my way. Why would he? In his mind, I was already irrelevant, a shadow in a building he thought was his kingdom. But kingdoms fall faster than their kings realize. I didn't go home that day. Instead, I drove straight to Harold's office. He was waiting, documents spread neatly across his desk, contracts, sale agreements, transfer of ownership. For weeks we'd been preparing every detail, waiting for the right moment. That moment was now. "You're certain?" Harold asked, his tone cautious but steady. I nodded. "More certain than I've ever been. If I let him keep running wild, he'll burn the company down to prove he's taller than the flames. This way, at least, it survives." We spent hours finalizing signatures, verifying transfers, making calls. By evening, Grant and Company was no longer ours, no longer his. I had sold it to a larger firm, one with a reputation for stability and respect for its employees. The terms were ironclad. Every long-serving worker would retain their position, benefits secured, no reckless expansion gambles. The money from the sale went directly into accounts Michael couldn't touch. Safe, untouchable. As I signed the final page, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't joy, it was release. The weight of 40 years lifted, the burden of watching it crumble under my son's arrogance finally gone. "Congratulations," Harold said quietly, sliding the papers back into their folder. "You've just sold your company, and you've just clipped your son's wings in one motion." That evening, I returned to the office one last time. The building was dark, silent. I walked through the hallways, pausing at the framed photographs, the first construction site we'd completed, the ribbon cuttings, the smiling faces of workers. Memories pressed against me like ghosts. In Michael's office, I stood behind his desk for a moment, running my fingers along the polished wood. He had sat here like a king, issuing decrees. Now it belonged to someone else. I left a single note on the desk. "Michael, you told me to stay out of family matters. Consider me out. But remember this: respect is not inherited. It is earned, and you never earned it." The next day, while Michael was sipping drinks on a beach under the Mexican sun, the news broke. Emails went out to staff announcing the sale. Phones lit up. Word spread like wildfire through the community. Michael's empire had evaporated in a matter of hours, sold out from under him by the man he thought was powerless. By the second day, my phone buzzed with calls. Some were from loyal employees thanking me. Others were from confused vendors seeking clarity. But one call stood out. Michael's. His voice was ragged, nearly shouting over the line, the sound of crashing waves in the background. "Dad, what the hell have you done?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sting. "You sold it?" he barked. "You sold my company while I was gone?" Finally, I spoke, calm as stone. "Correction, Michael. I sold my company. It was never yours. You strutted around on borrowed ground, thinking arrogance would plant roots. But paper doesn't lie. I owned it, and now I don't. Neither do you. You can't do this to me," he screamed. "Do you have any idea what I've built? What people will think?" I closed my eyes, picturing his smirk finally breaking. "I know exactly what people will think. They'll think a man who disrespected his father and his employees lost everything because he never understood the value of what was handed to him." He cursed, his words slurred by rage, then hung up. I sat there in my study after the call ended, the quiet pressing in. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the gnawing ache of betrayal, only a steady calm. The storm had passed, and I had steered the ship through it. Michael, meanwhile, was stranded on a beach with nothing but his arrogance to keep him warm. His empire was gone, his throne had crumbled, and I hadn't raised my voice once. Michael stormed into my house 3 days after returning from Mexico. I heard his car screech into the driveway before the door even slammed shut. Heavy, frantic footsteps pounded across the porch, and then he burst into the living room without knocking, face red, eyes burning with fury. "How could you?" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How could you sell my company out from under me?" I didn't move from my chair. I had been expecting this. In fact, I had been waiting for it. I folded the newspaper in my lap, set it gently on the coffee table, and met his glare with a calm that only made him shake harder. "Sit down, Michael," I said quietly. "You're shouting like a child." "Don't you dare talk down to me," he roared, pacing like a caged bull. "You've humiliated me. Do you know what people are saying? They're laughing at me. At me. My own father stabbed me in the back." I leaned forward, my hands clasped. "No, Michael. You stabbed yourself when you forgot who put the knife in your hand in the first place." His jaw dropped slightly, then clenched so tight I could see the vein in his temple. "You had no right." "I had every right. I cut in, my voice firm for the first time. "I built that company. I signed the contracts. I carried the debts when we were barely surviving. Every brick of that business was laid with my sweat, my sacrifice. And you thought you could just waltz in, wave me off, and call it yours?" He laughed bitterly, though his voice cracked. "I was taking it into the future. You were dragging it down. You don't understand the world." "Any more, Dad?" I stood then, slowly, my height still commanding despite the years. "The world may have changed, Michael, but decency hasn't, respect hasn't. You thought cutting people loose, mocking me in front of employees, and burning money on vacations made you strong. It made you weak. You didn't want a business. You wanted a throne. And kings without crowns are just men playing dress-up." His face flushed deeper. "You ruined everything. I had plans." "No," I said sharply, my voice slicing through his rant. "I ruined nothing. You did that when you told me to stay out of family matters." Those words freed me, Michael. They gave me permission to protect my life's work the only way I could, by making sure you never got your claws into it again. He froze. For the first time his rage faltered, replaced by something raw, fear, realization. "You mean to tell me," he said slowly, voice shaking, "you did this on purpose? You let me believe I had control, all while planning to take it away?" I met his eyes without blinking. "Exactly. I gave you every chance to prove yourself. You threw them away with arrogance. So I acted. Quietly, decisively, permanently." His chest heaved, his fists clenching and unclenching. You've destroyed me." I took a step closer. "No, son. You destroyed yourself when you confused inheritance with entitlement. Respect isn't passed down in a will. It's earned, and you never earned it." The room went silent. The only sound was the old clock ticking on the mantel, steady as a heartbeat. Michael's eyes glistened, though whether from rage or shame I couldn't tell. He stood there, jaw trembling, words stuck in his throat. Finally he muttered, "Everyone knows. They're all talking about it, about me, about how you outplayed me." I almost pitied him then. Almost. "Let them talk," I said softly. "Better they remember me as the man who built and protected something than remember you as the man who squandered it." He staggered back, as if the weight of those words pressed against his chest. For the first time since this began, Michael had no retort, no smirk, no arrogance, just silence. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard